All right, so you're back with us again for another deep dive, and this time, we're going to be talking about earthquakes.
Yeah, earthquakes.
We're both really fascinated by this topic.
Yeah, super interesting.
And we've got a bunch of material here, research papers, news articles, firsthand accounts, and we really want to kind of dig in and extract the most important things that we can learn from all this stuff about earthquakes and present it to you in a way that is, engaging and understandable.
And digestible. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so first off, just to get us all on the same page, what exactly is an earthquake?
An earthquake is essentially a sudden release of energy in the Earth's crust.
Okay.
And that results in, the shaking of the ground that we associate with earthquakes.
So it's like this energy that's been building up, and then all of a sudden
It's got to go somewhere, right? And
Yeah.
it releases in the form of these waves.
Okay, so that kind of takes us into what actually causes these things.
Yeah, so the primary cause of earthquakes is the movement of these things called tectonic plates.
Okay.
So you can imagine the Earth's lithosphere, that's the outer layer of the Earth, is kind of like a cracked eggshell.
Okay.
It's broken up into these massive pieces that we call plates, and they're constantly moving very slowly, but they are moving.
Okay, so they're floating around on something.
Yeah, they're floating on the mantle,
Okay.
which is this sort of semi-molten layer beneath.
Gotcha.
And so where these plates meet and interact with each other, that's where we get earthquakes.
So are they bumping into each other? Are they sliding past each other?
All of the above.
Okay.
Yeah, so they can collide head on.
Okay.
They can pull apart. They can grind past each other.
Okay.
And all that movement creates a ton of stress along these boundaries, which are called faults.
Okay.
Eventually, that stress builds up so much that the rocks just break.
So it's like bending a stick until it snaps.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's a very good analogy.
Okay, cool. So it's not just tectonic plates though, right?
Right.
There are other things that can trigger these.
Yeah, absolutely. So volcanic eruptions are one.
Okay.
Because those involve huge pressure changes underground.
Right.
And that can definitely trigger earthquakes.
Wow.
And then you also have certain human activities, believe it or not,
Really?
that can induce seismic activity.
Like what kind of stuff?
So things like fracking, extensive mining operations, even just filling up large reservoirs with water.
Wow. I would not have expected that.
Yeah, it's pretty surprising.
Okay.
But the thing is, even though we understand these general causes, predicting exactly when and where a major earthquake's going to happen is still incredibly difficult.
Yeah, if you live in California.
Right.
You just know it's coming, but you don't know when.
Exactly. It's like a ticking time bomb.
Oh man. Okay, so let's talk about how we actually measure these things, because the research mentions these things called seismic waves in different scales.
Yeah, so basically when an earthquake happens, the energy that's released travels outward in these waves, and we call them seismic waves.
Oh. Huh.
And there are two main types.
Yeah.
There are body waves, which travel through the Earth's interior.
Okay.
And then surface waves, which, as you might guess, travel along the surface.
Okay, cool.
So the body waves arrive first because they're traveling through the Earth.
Okay.
And there are two types of body waves, P waves and S waves.
Oh, okay. I've heard of those.
Yeah, so P waves are the fastest.
Okay.
And they kind of compress and expand the ground like an accordion.
Oh, okay.
And then S waves are a little bit slower and they move side to side or up and down.
Okay.
Like if you were shaking a rope.
Gotcha.
And then the surface waves come later.
Okay.
And those are the ones that cause the most damage.
Okay, why is that?
Because they're traveling along the surface where we are, where our buildings are.
Right.
And so the two main types of surface waves are love waves and Rayleigh waves.
Okay.
Love waves move side to side horizontally, and Rayleigh waves have this kind of rolling motion.
So like an ocean.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And then what about the scales? How do we measure how big these things are?
Right, so you've probably heard of the Richter scale.
Yeah.
which measures the magnitude.
Okay.
Which is essentially the amount of energy that's released.
Gotcha.
But then there's also the modified Mercalli intensity scale.
What's that one?
That one looks at the effects of the earthquake.
Okay.
So like what people felt, how much damage there was.
Okay, so like a level 1 versus a level 10.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But these days, scientists actually use the moment magnitude scale.
Okay.
Or MUGA.
Okay.
And that's considered the most accurate way to measure the total energy released.
Okay, so it's like an upgrade from the Richter scale.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So we've talked about the causes. We've talked about how we measure them now. Let's talk about like what happens when an earthquake hits. Like what are the consequences?
Yeah, so the most obvious consequence is the physical destruction.
Yeah.
Especially in urban areas, you get buildings collapsing, bridges and roads failing. And obviously that can lead to loss of life and serious injuries and just widespread property damage.
Yeah, and the sources talk about some other effects too, like landslides and tsunamis.
Right, so earthquakes can trigger landslides because they shake the ground loose.
Okay.
They can also cause something called liquefaction.
What's that?
Liquefaction is when the soil basically loses its strength and it behaves like a liquid.
Whoa. So the ground just turns to mush.
Yeah, essentially it's really dangerous.
Yeah, I can imagine. And then tsunamis.
Right, so if an earthquake happens underwater,
yeah,
that can displace a huge amount of water and create these massive waves that travel across the ocean.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, and they can cause incredible devastation when they hit coastal areas.
Oh man, it's just amazing the power of nature.
It really is humbling.
It really is. So given all this, like, destruction and the fact that we can't really predict them, what can we do to prepare?
Well, preparedness is absolutely key.
Okay.
Because we can't stop earthquakes from happening.
Right.
So we have to be ready for them.
Okay, so what does that look like?
So on a large scale, it means things like investing in earthquake-resistant infrastructure.
So like buildings and bridges.
Exactly. So designing them in a way that they can withstand the shaking.
Okay.
It also means developing early warning systems.
Okay.
So that people can have a few seconds or even minutes of warning.
Wow, that would be helpful.
Yeah, it can make a big difference.
Okay.
And then having really good emergency response plans.
Ah.
So that everyone knows what to do when an earthquake hits.
Okay, so those are like big picture things.
Yeah.
What about like just me as an individual? What can I do?
So there are a lot of things you can do.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
One of the most important things is to secure heavy objects in your home.
Okay.
So like bookcases, dressers, things that could fall over and injure you during an earthquake.
Makes sense.
You should also have an emergency supply kit ready.
Okay, what kind of stuff goes in there?
So food, water, first aid, supplies, a flashlight, a radio. Things that you would need if you were without power or water for a few days.
Gotcha.
And then you should also know the drop cover and hold on technique.
Okay, what's that?
So if an earthquake happens, you drop to the ground, take cover under a sturdy piece of furniture,
Okay.
and hold on until the shaking stops.
Okay, so it's like a little earthquake drill.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too.
So just to recap, earthquakes are mainly caused by the movement of these tectonic plates.
Right.
We have different ways to measure their intensity and their impact.
Yeah.
And while they can be incredibly destructive, we can do a lot to prepare and mitigate the risks.
Absolutely.
What I find really interesting is, thinking about how all these earthquakes are happening because of these massive forces that are constantly shaping our planet.
Yeah. It really puts things into perspective.
It does. It makes you realize that the Earth is always changing.
Yeah, it's a dynamic system.
It is. And it's something that, we have to be aware of and respect.
Absolutely.
So for all of you listening out there, think about this. You're standing on the surface of a planet that is constantly in motion.
Yeah. That's a pretty powerful thought.
It is. It makes you appreciate the power of nature and the importance of understanding these forces.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
See ya.
Bye.